very epic because it's like the countdown just like dun 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 dun. Here we are
and
at
it
my
cut you
last
off and everything. Yeah.
I just did it just as a sample to see, but I mean, I felt like that was like I felt like we were announcing like the Grammy nominees or something. Like it was a little intense.
Last week we said we were going to have theme music. We didn't deliver on that. So I think the next time we do this, we have to either get theme music, or we have to deliver on the countdown.
Well, the countdown has theme music, but we have to have like we need to have some like if we're the Lender Avengers, I think it has to be something really truly epic. Like it's
submit all of your music submissions to nfane@kindlending.com with all of your theme song submissions.
Yes, please. Yes. It's like in a land far, far away where interest rates are 3%. No.
Yes.
And yet we're here. Welcome to My Last Lease, where we are 3 mortgage loan officers who are experts at what we do now. But when we started buying our first homes, I don't think none of us were loan officers buying our first home, right?
No.
We all did it after. It was like, that sounds like a process I want to be a part of.
It was like a 45-day internship. It's like, oh, okay. Yeah. Maybe I can do this.
I have no clue what's going on. I don't know what I don't know, but I feel like I could probably do it. In my case, I'm like, I feel like I could probably do it better than my loan officer did. So I think Caden has a similar story,
similar story. Yes.
To start us off, let's, how old were you when you bought your first home, Nate?
I was 23, fixing to turn 24. So I'm going to count it 23. It was in that like lull. So my wife and I are actually like a year and like 2 months apart, but it was during that 2-month window where it looks like she's 2 years older than me. And I make age jokes all the time. So it was actually during that. So she was 25. I was 23.
Oh, good. And so she didn't threaten to divorce you at the closing table because you were.
But she was a much more experienced person at that point because she was 25 and I was 23.
Well, yes, I'm quite sure that she was more mature in the process. I was 22, and part of the kind of the story of why it didn't go well. We went under contract when I was 22, and then bought when I was 23 because I had a birthday in that 45-day plus process.
And we can see how the average age of people buying is getting a little bit older and older. I was 26, so
okay,
yeah, well,
so.
I rented for a year, a little over a year, right before, because I graduated college and then I rented for about a year and then I decided that I wanted to buy something. This was in 2013. So it was still very much a buyer's market. It was actually, what was the name of I think it was a Fannie Mae foreclosure. What was the name of that program? Was it Home Path, Home?
Oh, I'm thinking of the FHA one that had $100 down, but I'm trying to think.
This was like 3% down conventional. It's 3% down conventional. This will be a fun exercise. So it was
not home ready.
How much was yours? Mine was 114.9. I remember that. It was 3. So I did 3% down of 114.9.
I don't want to have the hate comments because mine was 97.5. I'm sorry, but that's what
an absolute steal.
That's why we're here, is because we want to share some lessons learned buying our first house. But I'm sorry. I bought a while ago, but it was a good decision. And it certainly felt scary as hell when we did it because I'd only rented out of college. And I figured people don't buy homes at 23. They buy them at 33 when you're a real adult, right? Because you feel like a real adult in your 30s.
Right. Yeah. No, I remember thinking that I wasn't ready. And I think a lot of people can probably empathize with that right now. I remember thinking that I wasn't ready. Like, man, this seems like a really big step. I think I was younger than what my parents were when they bought their house. So that was kind of like aged all that. But also I didn't have 20% down. And I think we all know that that's one of the big misconceptions is that you need 20% down. And if you don't have that 20% down, you shouldn't buy a house. So it felt weird only putting 3% down. And I want to say that all the closing costs were paid for by the seller, if I'm not mistaken. But then my mortgage payment at that time ended up being, I think, $100, maybe $200 more than what I was paying for rent. And so I figured, well, it was better to invest in myself and slowly build some equity instead of paying rent for. And it was nice because like I went from a 900 square foot small 2 1-bedroom house to, I think the first house was like right around 18 or 1900 square feet, which was more than enough room for us at that time.
I remember the first morning I woke up in the house, because my husband had picked it out, and so, like, got there in the dark, all this kind of stuff. It was a weird time, y'all, because we were able to live in it before we closed on it. Don't expect that now. Hello, #military town. But woke up and I walked around. I was like, this is all going to be ours. Like, there are bedrooms I don't even know what to do with. But I mean, it's such a kind of a mind fake, to realize that it's like, oh, this is me adulting. But yeah, it's what made y'all, or for y'all, what made it the right time to buy? Like, why were you like, okay, was it your lease ending? Was it just, it was more of a conscious decision of like, I'm going to invest in myself the way that you said, or what kind of made that push?
For me, more of, I think, just into being independent for Kelsey and I. We had rented for about a year and a half, almost 2 years. And then we moved back in for 6 months with her parents to try and save to do it. And they're probably going to watch this back. They know it. We wanted the hell out of there. So, but that was the plan. The plan was we didn't want to rent, but then also we couldn't keep living there. So it was a mix of, this is what we knew what we wanted to do. We had kind of gotten into some steady jobs for the first time. And it just life. It was all life. And to kind of touch on the early part of what you guys had talked on, with a little bit more recent realistic numbers. What are we talking about? 350,000.
Kick you off this live stream. Listen, I had a moment of vulnerability. I read the room. I know where I stand.
But okay, so also location in the country plays a huge part in that. Buying in south of Seattle is very much different than buying where you guys were. So, but 350,000. I remember we did down payment assistance, so I always like being able to talk on that, saying I did it. It's proof that it works. You just have to make sure your numbers line up. But from what I remember, that our rent payment from what our contributions were when we were renting with a roommate went up $800 to what our mortgage payment was. So it was a stretch. I always like talking on this as well of kind of depending on how luxurious you're living rent wise now, your mortgage is probably going to be more than your rent. Like that's a pretty set in stone thing. So understanding that there is sacrifice, but I can always talk on my certain sacrifice of we got into that home for, I think, $7,000. So we paid that in closing costs. Seller paid some. So we were able to get into a home for $7,000. And it turned into us being able to sell that home and move to a completely different state and fund it and put a 10% down payment on the next home. So like, yeah, I mean, that's the process that we're all trying to preach here.
Yeah, because sometimes it's not, I think it's easy to kind of get wrapped around the idea that it's like, I need it to flip, or I want to try to make sure that I have the gains that happened, 2020 through 2022. Like, hopefully, just for affordability at large, that was a fluke. But regardless, in a normal market, it still sets you up for these, there's just this compounding effect, right? You have to pay somewhere to live. So you're paying down the loan balance. The home is, over time, hopefully becoming worth more. And then you can use that to then money that you'd be spending anyway to then leverage, for future, whatever other future financial goals are. Maybe that's another home, or maybe that's, even in the current rate environment, talking with people of refinancing and paying off debt. It gives you flexibility. And that's where I think kind of that's at the root a lot of times of buying a home. If you're thinking about it logically, not just kind of the emotional aspect of wanting to have your home for your family, for yourself. The practical aspects of money look like kind of those smaller gains, but they do add up over time.
Well, so there's this big debate of whether or not buying a primary residence is an investment or whether it's a liability. And we can argue semantics all day long, but the way that I see it is
Let's argue semantics.
No. The way that I see it is like, it is a liability with upside. You can possibly have the upside of gained equity if you hold it for a long period of time. You can have the upside of positive cash flow if you move out of it and you decide to rent it. So it is not an asset in the truest sense of the word, to where like it's not paying you and it's not guaranteed that the value is going to go up. but it is a liability with upside because you can do so many different things. And that's why we're huge believers in homeownership, because like we've seen the power of that firsthand, not only with ourselves, but one of my favorite calls that I get right now is when I've got a former first-time home buyer calling me back wanting to buy their second home. And it's like, well, I bought this for 200,000 3-4 years ago, whatever it was. And now it's like worth 350 and my life has completely changed. Like, what do we do now? And it's like, oh, this is fun. Now we can plan. And this is, they made $50,000, $60,000 a year. Like, how long would it have taken them to save up that much money? Or it might be simply like they're able to leverage it and buy other investment properties, like whatever it is. Like, it is a wealth creator. And that's what I get a big kick out of now, is now getting those repeat clients.
Well, and I think what's interesting is between, the two of y'all and then kind of adding mine into it, because my first house was bought with a VA loan. So, no money down. So I think that because there's this misconception that you need to have a large down payment, you need to have a lot of money. Now, the more money you have, the more options you have, but there's still, even today, you don't have to pick on me, Caden, but even today, there's still a lot of really, really great options. I mean, there's still 100% VA, there's still 100% USDA, 3.5% FHA, 3% conventional like Nate used, and down payment assistance. So even though the market has changed, those options are all still there to make the barrier to entry as easy as possible from a cost standpoint. Would y'all do that same loan program again?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Same. And I have the same one I use. I keep preaching to people because I know it works. Like, that's right. I think knowing where my life went, I like that I did it that way, because then I can go, the hardest way you think it is to buy a home, I did that, and look what happened.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
See, and I didn't even know that. That's why these are great, because I didn't even know that that's how you bought your first home. But that makes sense why you're such a champion for it.
So I think all of us can agree that like our first time home buying experience wasn't perfect, and we learned a lot. So like, what do you think the biggest lesson that you learned during that process was? Like, what mistake did you not make the second time buying a home?
I read my documents a lot more. Now, by that point I was a loan officer, but I think I was so blinded by the fact of like, must buy home, because where we were, the rentals were sparse and scary. So it was like, oh, there's this option that you can get, you can buy a home. And my dad was a real estate attorney. And so, because we had somebody to say, oh, you can get this VA loan is 100%. And I'm like, I was born at night, but I wasn't born last night. And that sounds like a scam. And he's like, no, it's not. It's, it's a legit program. It's a great program. Here's how it works. But that's about all the guidance that I got. I mean, it wasn't like I was then asking him to, look through our estimate or stuff like that. But I mean, the loan officer had promised us one rate and then said that we were locked. And then when we got our disclosures, it was a different rate. And then it just got worse from there. So it was a great financial decision in the end. But then when I became a loan officer shortly thereafter and learned a thing or two, I kind of looked back on my own file and some of the questions that we were being asked last minute. And I was like, it should have never taken that long for them to ask for that documentation, because that's pretty basic upfront stuff that should not have been in any way a delay. So it was not, our realtor did look out for us some, so that helped. But for the most part, it just felt like we were just kind of like stumbling onto some date that we would supposedly make the house ours. And we were just responding to requests blindly. Like, I guess this is what we do. It is overwhelming.
Very much so. I mean, kind of, I think it's relative to your point of, for me, I would have asked more questions of like, just taking in more info. I had talked to you two about this, but I was like, I think I was so intimidated by the process and everything was just kind of moving forward that I almost felt like I didn't want to disrupt it. But I'm like, I don't think I fully know what's going on here. I think I knew I took the class to get down payment assistance, and this is how much money we need, and I think this is my payment. But I'm like, I don't know how it's all broken out. And I'm sure I could talk for all of us if like that's how we operate as loan officers now, is based off of how we bought our first home,
right?
And taking in feedback as we work with each client. But yeah, I encourage each person to ask questions. I think they're like, okay, you said it before. I'm like, I mean it, because this is your chance, because we're going to, 6 months from now, you're going to wonder. I'm like, let's get all this now. And I always say, I want you to know how you're going to buy your second home before we even talk. That's like, that's
Mhm.
how much info I want you to have on the first one.
Mm-hmm.
What I
So-
tell people is I want them to be able to like do my job after we get done with this. Like I want you to
Good.
feel like you have a really good idea of what we do for a living.
How do you quiz them? Do you say explain APR? I mean,
I really should come up with like an end of the transaction assessment. Let's put that on the list. We're gonna come up with a lender of interest end of the transaction assessment. That'll go over well. Like everyone will really love that. That'll be really great.
oh yeah, it'll be like an exit interview for clients. It'll be like, look, I have provided you every documentation known to man, and I just am glad to have my house. Thank you for all the education along the way,
Right.
but I'm done.
Please
There's a
do not
reason you do
contact
what
me.
you do, and there's a reason I don't.
Right. My people will call your people. Please don't contact me again.
Yeah.
So the first house that I bought was on a kind of a busy street. And
Mhm.
so when I went to go, I didn't really learn this lesson until I went to go sell that property. Because a lot of the feedback that I got, I'm trying to think of when I tried to sell that property. I think it was like 14 or 15. I was only there for like 2.5 years. It was basically like a live-in flip. We renovated it, had some equity in it, went to go buy a bigger house. But the lesson that I learned there, because it took 6 months to sell, the feedback that I kept getting was they didn't like the location. They loved the house, but they didn't like the location because it was on a 2-lane road that had lots of traffic. So
Mhm.
the cliche, it sounds like a cliche, but like location is like a real estate fundamental. So I was taught that real estate fundamental, and it was really reinforced that after I went to go sell that property, and everybody would give me the same feedback. We love the house, but we just hate that it's on this busy street. I'm going like, why? You can't hear the traffic inside. And so it wasn't a problem for me. But it was a problem for a lot of people that were wanting to buy. So the next
point.
2 houses that I bought, I really, really focused on like, is it the neighborhood that I like? Is it in a good location?
Mhm.
And then like, does it fit my budget?
Well, I think that's part of it, right? Is because, and I know we had talked about this a little bit. Really, people think about buying a house, they think like this is one transaction. And it is, and it isn't. It's kind of more like a 2-for-1. Like buying the house is one set of decision, and then, getting the mortgage is another set of decisions, and they go together, but they're not the same. And so we have a lot more of like an emotional reaction to a house of, oh, I can picture having Christmas here, or
Mhm.
this is the right school zone, or I can improve it and make it my own, whatever. And it's like, that's something that because it's right in front of us, I think it's easier for that to feel tangible and be interested and tied to that versus the mortgage and the financing aspect of it, which seems boring and complicated and whatever. And so people kind of push that off because it's like, oh, don't want to deal with that. I want to look at pretty houses. And it really has to be the flip side of that, because it's not like buying a car. It's not you find what you love and then you figure out how to finance it.
Well, and that's where I think people should approach it sometimes more as that liability with upside. There
Yeah.
is a lifestyle aspect to that, but then if you think about the numbers, like it's about personal budget, but then also the house that I live in now, it is not quite the size that I want. I would like a bigger house, but when I went to buy it, it fit our budget for the time. At that time, there was some possibility of the neighborhood kind of boosting up and growing up. But then also I knew that like if I didn't like it, I knew that I could get close to breaking even if I went to go rent it. So that was kind of my exit strategy. It's like, you know what? If we end up and we don't like this neighborhood, I know that for the payment versus what I could rent it for, I could get close to breaking even. And there's not a lot of skin off my back at that point. I can go buy something else. I committed to like, okay, I'm going to give this 3 or 4 years and we'll possibly pivot from there. But I bought that house with the rental value in mind and knowing that I could rent it. Now, the second house that I bought, I knew there was a lot of upside for it because of the location and the neighborhood that it was in. So I had strategy on every single house that I bought, and they were 3 different strategies too. But by and large, in the market that we're in, I like the idea of finding a place in a neighborhood that you like to live in, and you may have to sacrifice some square footage just because, based on the budget. But I also think back to like my grandmother. She lived in like an 1,100 square foot house and raised 2 kids in that for 50, 60 years. So it may have to be a little bit of scaling back on some space. But what I personally found, I went from quite a bigger house to the house that I live in now. what I found was like we actually liked it because we got rid of a bunch of junk, and you never know how much junk you have until you go and move. So it also helped us like kind of reprioritize.
Moving keeps you honest.
Yeah.
Do you and Christy asked a good question, which we'll talk about in a second, but when you were looking particularly from the standpoint of like, okay, here are my potential exit strategies, how much did your realtor play a role in that? Or because you were already a loan officer, you were thinking about that, just kind of how much did the realtor advise you, or how much did their input and their market knowledge help?
I did ask specifically about the rental, the rental aspect, like, hey, are there a bunch of renters in here? And there was a decent bit of long-term renters in my neighborhood already. So I knew that like there would be demand for that. I bought in a neighborhood that was right next to like a really nice neighborhood, which I love that strategy too, because inevitably people get priced out of that really nice neighborhood. And they're like, you know what? We like this location. We like where it is. And the amenities are actually kind of the same in this neighborhood, but we can get more bang for our buck there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about you, Caden? How'd you look at, like, it's hard to conceptualize. I think particularly on your first house, right? Like it's hard to think about, like, you're like, I just want to get into this first house. I can't even think about selling it. But I do think it's a good conversation to have, just because at some point it's more than just, it's like, I feel like it's kind of like, how some people, when they get married, all they worry about is like the wedding. And it's like, that's great. Like have a killer party. I love it. But like the marriage is not the wedding. So home ownership is not just getting into the home and closing day.
Yeah. So were the question being, what was my exit strategy?
Or yeah, I mean, was that something that was even on your radar? Or was it just like, we got to get out of the in-laws and we got to buy something?
There was no exit strategy. We also, I think a lot of what we learned and did, I stumbled into and then now share and realize that it was a good move, like of buying in December when people aren't looking and it's been sitting on the market. We were able to negotiate a little bit, but then as of like, what was our exit strategy out of that place? For the time being, we were going to live in Puyallup, Washington for 5 years. COVID played a huge factor in that. Home prices went up. Kelsey was laid off. I worked from home, didn't like my job, got in, became a loan officer. And with all of that, it gave us freedom to, what is going on? That was weird. Sorry. Teams decided to take over my entire page. Literally took everything over.
Not now.
Yeah. But with the freedom, we decided to move. So there was no exit strategy. It was, we were going to live there, and then life happened, much like how kind of life happened with us purchasing our first home. It happened. I had a better exit strategy for this place, and an ideology behind renting. And I liked the location. And the location has actually even been more built up since we've been here. So to Nate's point, I mean, location's such a huge point, and it's, and so also like, it's not the most desirable neighborhood, but I know it will be based on what is happening around our house. So I'm thinking about that more and more. The first one was pure, just like, we got to get our own place. So, yeah,
I wouldn't say it wasn't something that wasn't completely on my radar, but I didn't have I would say a defined plan until I built my fourth house. So bought one, built one, bought one, and then have built two. And so, a lot of times it was kind of like, I just need a place to be. Here we go. This is what we can afford. Let me find what fits within the budget, and we'll figure it out. The backyard's flat. Great. Awesome. Grand. Wonderful. Let's go. So it's definitely something that kind of came at me later, other than the fact of when I was buying my third, my realtor was helpful from the standpoint of like, you might not want to buy this house because of this, but it's, just like something to consider, because it can't really necessarily say yes or no. And there are rules that they have to play within, but it was helpful just to kind of say like, might be an issue with the layout of this lot or the topography of this lot, basically. And I appreciated that, because I was like, I need a place. I'm here for a week. I just need a home, in my budget. So it definitely is good to keep that in mind.
Well, and we all have different like risk tolerances too. So that's great that you were able to get that feedback and that guidance for that. And that's what, what the first one that I bought, like the wiring that we had aluminum wiring, and that was a big problem in Florida. And that was just like not a deal killer for me because I knew that I could replace that. I knew I could get the insurance that I needed at that time. And I wasn't scared to replace the wiring. I knew that it was just like a money thing. I knew that the numbers still worked at that point, and I knew that I still liked the house. So I knew that there was some maintenance coming up, and then I swapped that out right before I sold it. I should have done that before I listed it, probably, because everybody who was in the seller's disclosure of like, hey, it's got aluminum wiring, and a lot of people can't get past that mentally of like, oh, well, this is something that's going to have to be addressed. And I even put in there like, I'll pay for it. Like, I'm planning on replacing this. It's just like, I'm not going to do that until I know that I got a fish on the hook. So a lot of people, I found that like I probably have a little bit more risk tolerance than other people when it comes to stuff like that, because it would freak a lot of buyers out, understandably so.
Yes, I think you do. Because I'd be like, they're going to worry about it. I got to fix it. I have to make it possible, like easy to buy, all that kind of stuff. I think Christy had a good question, which I'll just repeat it for the other platforms. But do you guys call your customers after they close to see how things are going with their new house?
I like to do at least I like to remind them after at least 30 to 45 days of, hey, like your first mortgage payment is here if you haven't already gotten it already. But then also a 6-month follow-up, depending on what kind of rate environment that we're in. So checking in with them and seeing how that stuff is going. I try to keep it mortgage related because I don't want to be like, hey, how is the actual house? Because then, sometimes you get like a laundry list or something. Like, I'm sorry, but like that's kind of more like the realtors, whatever. But
so I know you kind of get robot hands. Did you get a warranty? I don't know. Like, I'm sorry.
I try to keep it about numbers and about mortgages and something that I can talk a little bit more educated on.
What about you, Caden?
I try to stay in touch as much as possible. A lot of people that I work with we communicate through Instagram still. And then I just try to follow along as much as possible with their life. So I'll always, more so I follow along with life and send messages and stuff of, congratulations on the baby, stuff like that. I will admit I probably need to set aside time to actually make the call, get on a certain timeline versus just like when things come up. But I do try to make it an effort to continually talk to the people I work with.
Christy's going to check in with us next month and see if you held to that promise,
Okay. Okay.
That's fine. Great. Grand. Wonderful.
Write that down.
No, I think it is important because that's what I try to tell clients, like, sort of when we're at the last hurrah and reviewing the final closing disclosure, make sure they understand their numbers and how we got there and all that kind of stuff is just, it doesn't really stop there because there are questions later on, getting a lot of mail that you're like, is this legit? Did my information get sold? All those kind of things that happen just because you're on public record as a homeowner. So you do get a lot of that solicitation and junk mail, but it's also like, I got my escrow analysis. Why did my payment go up? Well, because insurance went up or whatever the case may be, because I just don't want people to feel like they've made this major financial decision. And then it's like, okay, cool. Thank you. Like we've had closing. Bye-bye now. It's meant to be. I know sometimes people say it and it kind of feels like it's a threat, like you're a customer for life, and it's like, no. I just want to be a resource and help you if you ever have it forever. But I just want to be a resource, if it comes up. So to kind of close out, talking about, my last lease and all those kind of things. And just so you know, for future classes, we're going to get into more specifics around credit and down payment options and just things like that. But we wanted to at least just start with, we're human too. And we certainly weren't experts at all of our purchases necessarily. But what would you say is your number one advice for first-time home buyers?
Start early. Start early. Allow for time. Give yourself time that if not everything's perfect for the exact home that you want to purchase, that you've given yourself 3-6 months to solely fix or repair or just get everything in order. It may not be a fixing thing, but just getting things in order so that all the numbers will work for guidelines and everything works in your life and emotionally that comes with that purchase. I think a lot of people call with 2 months left on their lease and it's like, ooh, okay. Well,
because the more time that you have, the longer runway you have, the more the even if sometimes they're bigger adjustments, you're able to make that, you're able to make smaller steps that have a bigger change in direction versus it's like you're coming down to the wire and it's like, okay, you've got to get a gift from your parents. You got to do this and all this other kind of stuff that can happen if that's what happens to your timeline. But why not prepare ahead? Because there's no, there's nothing at risk to do that. I would say that mine is, really, you've got to kind of like you said, Kaden, is you need to work with somebody that you trust, but don't feel like you have to trust them blindly. There's a lot going on. It's your money. It's your home. You should ask the questions that you have because we're here to serve you and make sure that it's, that it's clear to you.
You're going to find people like us that will try to sell you. That's not really how we operate. We want to guide and lead you through the process, whether that be 12 months from now, whether that be hopefully not this, but like 12 days from now. But so what I would tell you is link up and build. Someone said this the other day, and I love this, but this guy called me. He's like, hey, like I'm looking to build a team for me trying to buy my first house, and I would love for you to be on my team. I'm like, man, that is such a great way to put that. You've got the loan officer, you've got the realtor, you've got the insurance agent, you've got all these people that are going to help you get into your first home. And then to Caden's point, like it's important to start that process early because a little tough love here. Most of the time, the home buying process is very stressful, but most of the time, a lot of that stress could be taken out of it if you do a little bit more prep work ahead of time and you don't fall in love with the house first and then try to figure out the financing. Let's get the financing. Let's get the numbers. Let's set the proper expectations so that you can then go strategize and make a smart decision when you buy your first home.
Yep. And while I pull up the resource that we have, do you want to answer Mandy's question?
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So
yeah, you go.
Says, worried about finding the right loan officer in an expensive area where things move quickly. We don't want to move as quickly. I can equate it to like Seattle, where it's expensive, things move fast, people can potentially write offers over the top or over the list price. Now finding the right loan officer, that's tough. I mean, I think finding the right loan officer is mixing your own research with also, is there anyone in your life that you trust to give you, some advice of who should I talk to? I think there's a good balance of both, but if you feel like, hey, I really want to make this decision on my own, stick to that. Cause I know you'll hear a lot of people chatter. You just have to make very clear what your plan is. Cause like I was saying, you could have chatter from family or whatnot. You just have to understand, am I asking someone for advice or am I finding this information on my own and sticking with who I think is aligned with me? So just choosing that path of choose your loan officer.
Go look at them. Go look them up on social media. Hopefully they're producing some type of content or posting about their business, and see if you think that you would jive with them, vibe with them. You're looking for someone that's there to educate you and help you along the way, as opposed to someone that's working on their own timeline.
Perfect. You want to close us out with the QR code? And apologies for the typo, but we're all human.
I wasn't going to say it.
Thanks, Caden. Appreciate that.
I'm not even going to look for the typo. But yeah, so if you want to scan this QR code, it goes to a first-time homebuyer guide. So check that out. A bunch of good stuff in there. It's got a plethora of information and knowledge to help you, guide you to buy your first home. And we will be back next month. Is it the third? We're doing third Wednesday. Is that what we're doing?
Third Wednesday.
Third Wednesday, we will be back. We will be live again, right where we are now. But be on the lookout for another Facebook event, and we will blast it out on all of our socials as well.
See you then.
See you, everyone. Bye.